Teachers of Reddit, what is the most disturbing thing you've heard a student say? I'm a little late. I had a student who was deathly afraid of using the bathroom because monsters who wanted to get her were in the vents. Turns out her dad used to abuse her in the bathroom. This absolutely broke my heart. I hope she was able to get out of that situation and get the support she needed. I mean, kind of. Her dad died. Mom took off and was on drugs. She was living with grandma, but they wound up homeless for a good long while. They eventually moved in with mom in another state. Haven't heard from her since then. She breaks my heart every time I think about her life. During my second year student teaching, a teaching unpaid internship, a student brought a few bags of heroin to school in his backpack. He pulled them out in the hallway to show his friends before recess. He said, "I brought treasure from home. My mom says it's worth more than me." The kids were ruining and dying. The most fucked up part is that the school expelled him. We didn't help him at all. I think about him still. 9 years later. Oh, this was a 8-year-old. Second grade. Public schools give up too easily. No child left behind. What bogus. I had a student tell me about his parents leaving salt around the house. Bizarre. But I didn't connect the dots until they were arrested. Turns out, that was cocaine. I was thinking Winchesters. I was thinking witches. Paraprofessional in an elementary school. A kid looked at me and casually said, "My mom died Sunday. Her funeral is next week," and shrugged. That's the emotional numbness you get after the cry buckets run empty and you've said and thought everything 1,000 times over. While student teaching, had a student shout, "You guys wanna see the gun in my backpack?" He was trying to joke, but security was called and the intervention specialist kept all students away from the bag. My younger brother did that in Heathrow once, in front of 2 DFT officers with machine guns, with a regional accent that is often mistaken for Irish. Yeah, my naturally very tanned mum has metal in her back from surgery, in a country coming home and they don't speak much English and we weren't fluent in their language. She sets off the metal detector, strips off everything she can think of and it still goes off. These dudes are raising their guns and shouting. Luckily I was too young to realize running over to her could have got us both shot as I had worked out what was going on. Had to lift her shirt in the back and show them the scar to get them to understand and back off. We have family and friends from Ireland and definitely not an accident to have and joke about guns or bombs. One of my students' parents were fighting. Dad left home then came back to talk. They went out to the car to fight so the kids wouldn't hear. He shot and killed the mother then himself. The girl came to school the next day and just said, "I have nowhere else to go." Apostrophe. Good grief, that's heartbreaking. I guess I'll reply here for lack of a better place. I think about her a lot. Our school has had some really traumatic incidents. It's like that when you are really a cross between small town and family. We have over 5,000 students at the high school and inevitably there is a tragedy now and then. I wish I didn't actually know of worse things, but there you are. As far as this girl's story, her aunt picked her up and took her and her sister to Michigan. She came back to South Florida to visit once and said she was going to college. I don't know where she and her sister are now. Coached elementary pep. Had a 9-year-old student call me an infested tampon sucker. More surprised than angry. At the time I was 23 and never heard an insult like that. I was teaching a high school jewelry/metal shop CL but and some students alerted me to one student trying to sneak out some of the metal files. When confronted, he said he wanted to use them to stab people in the halls. I had him removed permanently, to say the least. Coworkers told me a sad story of a boy who had weapons in his backpack. Other students came forward one day and said, "Mrs. We think you should look in boy's backpack. There's some stuff in there that's not allowed." These boys were usually happy-go-lucky, and at this time they were clearly worried themselves. Teachers found tools in the backpack which might seem chill, but there was definitely something off, like 2 hammers and a couple of screwdrivers which had been filed down. After some discussions, the sad story came to light. The boy was not in a safe home. His father, or stepfather, I'm not exactly sure, was abusive to the boy. And his mother. Apparently they had recently had a confrontation and the boy was sent to stay at a friend/neighbor's house. He stole the tools from the workshop in that house. Pretty much grabbed anything he could in the moment he had. Anything he thought he could use to defend his mom next time. This kid was 13. The one year I taught 5th grade, I overheard a boy talking to his friends about how they should corner a female student in the bathroom and gang rape her while someone stood watch at the door. A couple months later, he wrote a very graphic letter that was passed around CL but about how my giant boobs were the only reason he came to school and went into explicit detail of how he wanted to duck E. This was 5th grade. E. He was 10. 0. How on earth was he aware about gang rape and fucking? G. Question mark exclamation mark question mark. Exclamation mark question mark. I can't imagine what he was exposed to at home to have that kind of knowledge. E. I stick to the primary grades now, and I've heard some heartbreaking stories. S. But this one definitely sticks out as the most disturbing. G. One of my students threatened to kill my dog while I was out walking her. This was after he had cussed me out, ripped up his work, and disturbed the class. It was his second day in class. Second and last day, or just second day? Just second day. He was back the next day, and I had to teach him like normal. My dad wants to kill me with his hunting gun. E. 9 years old. What did you do after they told you that? Under state laws in all 50 states, I'm pretty sure teachers are mandatory reporters of child abuse. So the only legal answer is I called the police and/or social services. I had a student who had just moved to our school. 3rd grader. His first day he had this huge gash over his nose. I don't know why, but I just didn't think much of it. A couple days later I asked him what had happened, and he said that his mom's boyfriend's dad pinned him against a wall and whipped him with his belt. Then showed me marks on his back as well. He kind of laughed it off and said, yeah, has mean. It took every ounce of me not to cry right then and there. I immediately went next door to get an adult to take over my CL butt and ran to the principal. She called the police, and they had some kind of excuse why they wouldn't be able to come right away. She demanded they be there today because she was not sending that boy home. They did show up. They walked him home, and they watched as the boyfriend's dad packed up and left. The boy was in 3rd grade, had the dirtiest mouth, and was probably one of the funniest and sweetest kids I'd ever met. He did tell me that the man moved back to Samoa later that year. Mom stayed with boyfriend, so knew stuff about the man. He moved schools the next year though, so I don't know how he's doing now. It wasn't a student, but his father. A guy came up to me on parents' night and told me to call him if his kid needed a good yelling, since his kid was such a useless duck-up. While I stood there in shock, he added, he's always been lazy, but he's been worse since his roommate at his last school killed himself. Don't hesitate to call me if he pulls that bullshit. Apostrophe. Fuck that guy. For real. What a dick. I'm hoping the kid is doing well now. Call me if the dad needs a good yelling, since he's such a useless duck-up. I wish I knew. I wrote his college rec and was brutally honest about how much I respected the man he grew into despite his parents. He went to college about 5 years ago, and we lost touch. I hope he's okay and found friends to be his family. I once had a piano student who said he couldn't practice at home because his stepfather would beat him to have to listen to it. Leaving aside the child abuse, why would you pay for piano lessons if you aren't even going to let your kid practice? It was probably music CL but at public school, not paid private lessons. A 6-year-old barely getting out the words "my mama choked me" between tears. A 2nd grader having a full meltdown about his low grade, saying his dad was going to make him sleep outside again if he found out. These are some of the things that keep us up at night. Heartbreaking. No one knows where my mom and dad are, or if they are even alive. Logan, a kid in a CL but I subbed for who was being raised by his grandmother. Weirdly enough, I live next to a kid named Logan who has parents that abandoned him. Maybe only absent parents like the name Logan, or it's a very small world. During a CL but field trip, a girl in CL but casually mentioned before everybody that the road we were driving down was the same one she tried to kill herself on the year before because she was bullied so badly. Why? She said she'd been driving and floored it. T. Hoping to hit a tree. E. Only to change her mind because she didn't want to hurt her family. Y. It just came out of nowhere and from the girl, who was generally considered incredibly popular. R. Kind. D. And well liked. D. Had an international college student write a paper about his family, and a big part of it was talking about how he was jealous of his cousin's dog. So he drowned it in the ocean in front of said cousin. When I asked him why, he said he wanted the dog, and if it wasn't his, it didn't deserve to live. I gave the paper to my bosses, and he ultimately got deported for a bunch of violations and red flags. Runners up are a girl explaining she decided to go to college after her best friend was murdered in front of her during a gang turf war. And another girl who tried to explain to the CL but we torture porn movies like Megan is Missing are the best movies ever. Both of these two were in the same remedial class. Man, we had a public speaking CL but with the best student present at the end of the year. And his story was about coming to college after his brother was killed in gang shit. Pretty sobering for freshman year me first semester in. My situation was kinda like this, but not as bad. I was in a freshman English CL but and we had a presentation at the end of the semester about our semesters. Everyone else's was about things like failing an exam, getting parking tickets, etc. Mine was about how mom started going crazy halfway through the semester and evicted me from my room. So I was effectively homeless for 2 weeks and had to drive 3 hours back and forth each day to go to my dad's house and back to class. It honestly wasn't that bad compared to some things, but the look on some of their faces was priceless. This one student once told me, unprompted, I like red cars because that's the color of car my mom used when she left us to do drugs. What do you even say to that? Second grade teacher here. A student recently told me his parents have a vibrating bed. I had to hold back laughing. I had a student, under 10, tell me he wanted to cut my head off and watch me bleed. I had the audacity to tell him that he needed to put his crayons up before he could get his Play-Doh out. Closed bracket. A student once told me he was going to burn his house down. We talked about how that would ruin his house and how he could possibly hurt his mom and dad or himself. His reply was, Ed, make sure my mom was dead before I burn it down. This kid is 8. Edit. Thanks for all the upvotes. I work as a special education teacher, specifically with students who are emotionally disturbed or have other disorders that impact their behavior. This isn't even the most fucked up thing I've heard, just one of the most memorable. Also, for those of you wondering about the possibility of abuse, I truly do not believe he is being abused. He has been my student for several years and it's not uncommon for him to make disturbing statements. In fact, if I had $1 for every time he told me he was going to poison or stab someone, I would almost have enough money to fully fund my classroom. Makes you wonder if anything was going on in the home, or if the kid just had a violent streak. D. 6th grade, came to school with a bruised face and told me he got pistol whipped and his dad got murdered the week before. This kiddo cried in my arms. I let him sit in my CL but with his head down all day. He missed school for a bit a couple weeks later and I was worried sick. His girlfriend told me he was in juvie for weed. It kept happening, but substances got harder. I think about that baby all the time. By 7th grade he was too hard to open up to me and we didn't keep in touch. I think about him and his girlfriend, another favorite student, constantly. They really throwing 6th graders in juvie for ducking weed? That's some shit, if I've ever heard it. Especially if he was dealing with the death of a parent. Man was just trying to feel better, and then he was punished for it. Fuck that shit. He needs therapy. You know what will help these kids get better adjusted? Institutionalization. A nightmare. I had a senior student describe to a friend in CL but how she was going to duck her boyfriend that night. T. The boyfriend is also a student at school. L. It got disturbing when she asked me for my opinion. N. In this situation, a female teacher would be creeped out. A male teacher would be creeped the duck out. As a male teacher, I just explained what teenage boys are like and not get her hopes up. Trying to convince a 17-year-old student that drugs are not the way to go and that he has a full life ahead of him when he says, doesn't matter I'm gonna be dead or in jail by the time I'm 25. He had been told he was nothing his whole life and he absolutely believed it. Spent up until he graduated trying to prove him wrong. Edit. Oh goodness. Thank you kind redditors for the awards. Unfortunately, I have since left teaching at that school and don't have a way to contact him. Last we talked, he was thinking of trade school. I was this kid. I started smoking pot at 10 and had graduated to heroin by 14. My entire adolescence I was told I was worthless, so I believed it and acted accordingly. At 13 my vice principal told me I would never amount to shit, so I should quit school altogether and stop wasting everyone's time. To be fair, I had just called her a cunt for suspending me over skipping classes. I did stop. Never graduated, which is my biggest regret. I'm now 20 years sober and work as a paramedic with a government pension. Edit. Holy crap, this exploded. Glad you guys appreciated my tale. Thank you kind strangers for the awards. Sorry to hear you had such a rough start in life. Is there a way you could still graduate with evening classes once COVID has settled down a bit? I know in my country there's grown-up education to still obtain a diploma later in life. A kindergarten student drew a picture of himself floating in outer space smiling and pointing at a giant red button on his spacesuit. I asked what the button was for. He said, "It's so I can suicide myself, so I can be with Jesus." His completely embarrassed mother responded to my concerned email explaining that this portrait was likely the fruit of two separate conversations she'd had with him that week. The first explaining suicide bombers, the second explaining that his recently deceased grandfather was in a better place with Jesus. Kids are wild. Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe for more videos.